It's The Law with Morelli Churtko, and joining me is Leigh Peterson, managing partner of Morelli Churtko. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, we wanted to talk a little about your practice is civil litigation and personal injury. We're going to talk a little bit about civil litigation lawsuits. First of all, I guess we should talk about how a civil lawsuit sort of unfolds.
Well, of course, as we all know, there's both people that are suing and people that are being sued, so it depends on which side of the equation you're at. But generally speaking, lawsuits are commenced because there's a dispute of some sort. Personal injury files are related usually to car accidents, and civil litigation cases generally can be anything from contract disputes, property disputes, corporate disputes, goes on and on and on. So I act for both sides in a lot of these disputes, depending on who retains me, and we go from there.
When you watch television shows, whether they're semi-reality shows, whether they're dramas, does it go down like that? I've never been sued, nor have I sued anybody.
I often tell clients, I said, don't get sucked in by TV. It's not like that at all. It's generally very boring. It's not anywhere near as exciting as you see on TV for the most part, but that doesn't mean it isn't stressful, and oftentimes it can be quite stressful for both the litigants and the lawyers involved.
I was talking with one of your co-workers down at Morelli Churtko, and she was telling me that Rachel Lammers, and she was telling me that sometimes in these civil suits, how do you maximize your potential for receiving that settlement or receiving the that part of the court case? Well,
first of all, people have to understand what a lawyer's role is, and they oftentimes think that lawyers, all they do is stand up and talk. And yes, we are advocates for clients, but we end up being counselors and teachers and organizers and delegators and communicators and negotiators and all of those things. And we have to do that, generally speaking, because unless you're dealing with an experienced client who's been through this quite a few times, this is new, unfamiliar territory, scary for a lot of people, and so they need to be educated and they need to be helped along and taught about what goes on in a lawsuit in order to get through it. And so that's part of our job as well.
Typically, or is there a typical answer to this or a standard answer on how long these lawsuits often take?
No, there isn't. And the reason being is this: in a personal injury lawsuit, people get injured. And I've always told clients that a personal injury lawsuit is like a 3-act play. The lawyer is the director and the playwright and the producer. And the first part of the play is about the individual. The second act of the play is they get in an accident and they have a bunch of injuries and they get treatment and hopefully get better. But the third act of the play is always, what's the end of the story? Are they better? Are they going to get better? What's the end of the story? And if you don't have the end of the story, you don't have a play that makes sense. So it takes people time to heal depending on what the injuries are, and you really can't resolve the case until you have the end of the story. How did they do at the end of the day? So that deals with personal injury ones. Other civil cases, you can have a little more control over them, because if you're talking about a contract, you obviously don't have to wait for a contract to get better. So you can set dates and set trial dates, and really it's a matter of scheduling time availability of the court to have a trial, and that's more of the issues in timing on other cases.
Do you have to go to trial, or what are some of the other options that are available?
Well, no, you don't, and the vast majority of cases settle. The vast majority of personal injury cases settle unless there's a specific issue in them that is difficult to resolve. And the rules of litigation and the rules that the courts abide by tend to focus parties as they get closer to a trial date to force them into a negotiation stage. And so most cases settle because they should settle. And most lawyers, if they're doing their job, because their clients want cases to settle, is to work towards settling. And so you have to be a negotiator and a strategist and all of those things to try to get the case to the point where it makes sense to try to resolve it and then take steps to resolve it.
Yeah, so how does, take us through that process a little bit on how the lawsuits get settled?
Well, there's a number of different processes for doing that, obviously. One is you just negotiate with the other side directly, but there's also mediation, and I do mediation work as a mediator. And there's various processes that you can go through to have a mediator who is not someone who decides the claim for you, but they are facilitators to get the parties to discuss and work together to resolve issues and hopefully resolve the claim entirely. Some cases go to arbitration. Sometimes there's mandatory arbitration where you have an arbitrator who essentially acts like a judge and is empowered to make a decision for the parties. And the third one is, you can have outside parties, you can have a judge involved. There's judicial settlement conferences where you can ask a judge to actually get involved with the parties and work with them sort of like a mediator and try to get a resolution of the claim. So there's lots of different avenues that you can consider in order to trying to resolve a lawsuit.
When someone says, I'm going to sue, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. When people come into your office, what's the biggest mistake or biggest misunderstanding that people have regarding the law and lawsuits?
Excellent question. This is kind of a funny story, but it's true, and I tell clients this. So they come in and they say, I want to sue somebody. It's not about the money. It's about principle. And I said, that's great. Principle is very important, and I admire people with principle, but you have to understand that principle can be very, very expensive. And once they understand that litigation is expensive, sometimes the principle becomes secondary, as it should, because lawsuits primarily are not about punishing people. They're not about getting a revenge. It's about getting damages. They ultimately, almost all of them boil down to money, unless you're seeking a declaration with respect to something or property or something like that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for shedding some light on that. Good information. Thank you, Leigh.
You're welcome.
Leigh Peterson, managing partner of Morelli Church Co. on It's the Law on Radio NL.